Good afternoon, guys. I'm Bert Sorin from Sorin X Exercise Equipment, Sorin X Outdoors over there. And this is Derek Woodske, Cal Dietz, and Brandon Lilly. We're here to talk to you today, part 2, about training for the outdoors. So Derek Woodske was a national champion hammer thrower for Canada, NFL strength coach, and been a personal trainer all over the world for the last couple decades. Cal Dietz is a master strength coach out of Minnesota and also an Olympic coach. Brandon Lilly, 2-time world champion in powerlifting, active bow hunter. So we realize that there's a lot of people training in this world of hunting. We feel like we could offer something a little bit different from the background that we've had and why from a scientific approach. We see at Sorin X Outdoors the history that we've had, which is probably close to 100 years between the four of us, whether it be from an experiential standpoint or coaching, of strength and conditioning and competing, bringing that into a place of the outdoors, which is something that we very much love in our own passions, and connecting the two. So yesterday you might have heard us talking about training for hunting, training for alpine style hunting, wilderness style hunting. And thankfully, if we still have your attention, I know yesterday someone was asking us if they could train, if they didn't have a lot of time to train and they only had 30 to 45 days before elk season was coming up, which is about where we are now. Was there anything that they could do to ramp up in these last really 30 to 45 days to get ready for the hunting season? And Derek, he made a good point. If you're trying to be optimal for that time, if you're starting a month out, you're 11 months late. And it's a harsh reality in some ways to realize that optimal that boat has sailed. But if we still have your attention, realize there are some things that you can do to maximize your effectiveness and really kind of hack the system a little bit. So specifically, that's something that Derek and Cal are going to talk about today. We're not only going to look at this always from the exercise standpoint, from a mechanical standpoint, and that means mechanically moving loads with the muscle itself. Distinct points of the equation are also your hormonal responses within your body, which is a lot of times the mechanical muscular movement of lifting is actually the stimulus that creates the hormonal response within your body, but also the cellular response in your body. So Derek and Cal and Brandon, I want you guys to talk a little bit about that. As a startup of, let's say you do have 30 to 45 days before that elk hunt that's going to be at altitude, what are your challenges and what are your possibilities to actually maybe not get better, but have a more positive experience that actually will lead to success?
Let's say you're fully committed and the times come where you have to commit yourself.
So, real quick, I want you to key in on that. Fully committed is the key to that. If you have 30 days, the screwing around is over, right?
Yeah, you're saying, hey, I'm adjusting my schedule, and I don't want to sound like it's 4 hours a day because, and here we're going to just teach you hacks of when's the optimal time to do something. So we know that you need to get in shape. So when we do that, in my opinion, with the tactical community that I've done this with, is to do cardio in the morning. Now, when I say cardio, I would be safe to say to develop cardio, your heart rate in this age group, Derek, would you say 140 to 150 range for cardio?
Yeah, I think that's
development.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a safe estimate based on age, based on activity level.
Yeah. So everyone sitting here, cardio in the morning, I would recommend fasted, which means you can have your coffee, you can have maybe a little bit of fat in that coffee, and you're going to do your cardio in the morning. That can be anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes of cardio. And you're going to wait 2 hours before you eat on that particular workout because there's an enzyme. And if we want to get into it, it's called AMPK, and that enzyme is elevated. That enzyme has a lot to do with fitness levels, with longevity, with your ability, just metabolic diseases like diabetes and just general overall health of various organs. So you're going to activate that enzyme with the cardio, especially if you're a fasted morning cardio. Now, when I say cardio, it doesn't mean on a bike or jogging down the road. A cardio can be a weightlifting circuit. It's just that your heart is not and you're not ramping up going a super hard. You're just doing a cardio workout where your heart is staying below, let's say 150 in this population. So between 150 and you can even get some development at 130. So if that's your range, and you can do and we may be talking light sled pushes.
That's more steady state, not interval style.
Right, yeah, the intervals where you're going hard, your heart jumps up to 160, 180, let's say. But this, it can be any type of exercise. You just got to modify the intensity. You got to modify the load so that your heart stays below 150 in the mornings, okay?
So it needs to be, I know you spoke before, 120, 130 at least, because below that you're not receiving the...
It's not much of an aerobic effect.
But you crank it up higher, other things happen.
Yes. So if you stay in that range, you're going to get a cardio effect. So let's say you get up in the morning a half hour earlier, you just pound out 30 minutes of cardio. Whatever you choose to be, it can be a light sled push or a sled drag, it can be your bike workout, but it's steady state, and then you wait 2 hours. Now most people say, hey, you need a drink after your workout. I agree when you do intervals, but at this point in time in the day, you have to build that cardio. And we're talking about optimizing brain function and all kinds of things that comes with this enzyme. But ultimately, if you can do that, wait 2 hours to eat, and then you can eat something, you're gonna optimize fat loss, and it's actually your ability to burn fat, which when you run out of sugars in the mountain because you're on a calorie deficit, the ability to switch over to burn fat is so important. And this enzyme helps with that metabolic fluctuation so that you can switch over from burning fat to, let's say you find some food or some berries that you want to enjoy, you eat those and you can switch over to burning sugars really fast, and you go back and forth, okay? So that's your morning hack. And how many days a week can you do that? I think you can do it 5 days to 6 minimum. And if you want to take a light day, let's say you feel bad but you want to do something, you can even go 120. 120 is going to help you recover in the morning. So if I wake up in the morning, and I kind of do this all the time, if I'm really beat up, I just go 120 beats per minute, and then I'm good. Because it's just a recovery, it's not a training effect. To get an aerobic training effect to help you get you through your hunts, you need to go from about, your heart rate, again, needs to be 135 probably plus to 150 in that range of motion for this population. Some of my athletes go to 170 before they can get, 150 to 170, but they're 23-year-old kids that are really in shape.
Sure.
That's far from where I'm at, or any of us.
Sure.
Let's be honest.
Now, what happens when you say if you were to go over that threshold, or if you're going to take a protein shake? Because a lot of people say you want to train, then like you said, get a drink after, whether it's a protein shake. Some people even do a pre-workout, probably not before cardio, but a protein shake is something that a lot of people have prescribed to do. And I know you said with some of your tactical athletes going through selection, they've made that mistake as well. What happens when you take on board calories right after that cardio, or if you go too high on your heart rate?
What happens is that enzyme actually gets shut down. So the benefits that you're trying to hack here, and if you do this fasted and you get the right heart rate zone, you can actually train a little less but get a greater result. And if you pound a shake right after that, it minimizes that enzyme because it's activated for 2 hours after you do that cardio. And when you pound calories, you actually downregulate it.
Is that due from insulin?
Insulin, it's all tied together. It's a very complex system, but yes. But now you want to do that if you're going to work out in the afternoon after a weight session, that where your heart rate has got above 150. You want to get that calories in like they've been teaching us.
Because that's mTOR.
Yeah, it increases the enzyme. Another enzyme is called mTOR to actually help regenerate your muscles from the weight workout that you've just done the damage in. Does that make sense?
Right. So mTOR would be more of an anabolic hormone.
Yep.
And would AMPK be more of a catabolic?
Yeah, it would be. I don't know if it's catabolic, but it's not an enzyme that is going to rebuild you like the mTOR in the PM. So then you would want to lift weights in the afternoon, and yes, get your shake in after that workout, because these are two completely different types of workouts.
Right. So you're building glycogen stores all day through your calories, onboarding calories going into your what you call intervals. And intervals, like we were talked about before, that could be sprint intervals, that could be high end metabolic cardio, or it could be weightlifting. When you defined with me when we were talking the other day, weightlifting as an interval workout, it was like, gosh, I've been lifting weights for 30 years. I never thought of it as an interval workout.
Yeah, I look at workouts. It's either an aerobic workout or it's an interval workout. There's the two for me. So if it's an interval workout, it's weightlifting, sled pushes, bike sprints, hard stuff for 20, 30 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever it is. Cardio is essentially something that's below lactate threshold for me. Now, they both have a conditioning effect, yes, but the key focus is to optimize what you're doing at a certain point in time so that you get the most bang for your buck.
Right.
Okay, so could somebody jump up 30 minutes early, get a 25-minute cardio in, 5-6 days a week, preparing for this hunt in 30 days? I think that's a commitment that if you're fully committed that you can take on.
Just like you said before, if you've not done the stuff for 11 months prior, I'd hope you could commit for the 30 days
Yeah.
before. You better be in it waist deep at that point, right?
100%. And then in the evening, I feel like you've got enough volume in. If you just, I think Derek or Brandon said, you hit one body part that day, or maybe it's another 30-minute workout. You've only invested 60 minutes, but you're getting a lot more out of that 60 minutes by splitting the differences up. Does that make sense? So let's say you do it all in the evening. Let's say you do your lift and then you do a cardio afterwards. All these things aren't adapting at the same level. You're kind of confusing the body with all these different enzymes adaptations, and one will actually shut down the other. So what you got to do is you got to separate these things. And we need both these things to happen to be optimal up there.
Right. Now, one other question I had, we were both talking before, fast twitch, slow twitch, stuff like that. I think, well, first of all, I'll let Derek comment on this before I go down that other rabbit hole.
Well, and I think when we look at this particular case, the other thing that we have to look at, there it is. The other thing that we have to look at in regards to why we'd want to do this in terms of preparing the athlete for the mountain or the adventure they're going on is the fact that that session that you're doing in the morning, or an aerobic session that has a slightly lower intensity to it, if you can build up that volume over the 30 days, it's going to be the one variable that actually allows you to rest when you're not working or walking for the day. So when you return back to camp or when you're trying to sleep and recover and you don't have that basic aerobic system in check, your heart rate, especially at altitude, will stay elevated longer. You won't recover, and all of a sudden, if you start looking at your Garmin or whatever device that you're using, you may be resting in your normal aerobic or higher zone, correct? So you're actually resting in a hormonal deficit state because you didn't do the groundwork to be able to recover from the day of activity. And so if you can bring up that entire system so that when you shut it down at night and try to sleep, you want to be plummeting that heart rate as much as possible, even at elevation, so restoration can upregulate and be ready for the next day. And if you never get fit enough to do that, you'll never rest enough to recover over the course of the entire hunt.
And it will wear you out.
Yeah.
You'll be shot, and you don't understand why. But the importance of aerobic, I just tell people, if you don't think aerobic is that important, hold your breath for 5 minutes. Let me know how it goes, right? We're an aerobic-based organism. Everything, even your short sprint heavy lifting recovery needs an aerobic capacity to get better, to recover. Not whether you just stop for 5 minutes to rest or you're sleeping in the middle of the night, as you say, it's of magnitude.
100%. I always tell people the simplest way to think about it is if you want a bigger bicep, you have to get fit enough to do enough repetitions to make the bicep bigger, right? It's that simple. So if you're in terrible shape and you can only do 3 reps, you're going to have skinny arms your whole life, right? But you have to get fit enough to handle the requirement needed to do the successful thing, right? And everything kind of cascades from there, right? If you want to run fast, you have to run fast multiple times to get better at running fast, right? Without even talking about fitness. So if you aren't in shape to run enough repetition or to do enough repetition of anything, you'll never master skill, right? So aerobic is base for skill development.
Everything.
Everything.
And when you were talking earlier, and I've experienced this at camp when you're trying to sleep and you're at altitude and you've outputted heavily during the day, and then you wake up in the morning and your heart rate's still like 70 beats per minute or whatever it is. But the problem with that is you stay, I would say, in sympathetic, fight or flight, right? And your body only recovers hormonally and everything else in parasympathetic. Explain that a little bit.
Well, 100%, and I'll let Kel go in deep on this one, but basically, when we think about shutting the system down, we think rest, digest, right, which is parasympathetic state or where the body starts to relax out. So I always used to tell my athletes the rate in which we excel towards, say, an Olympic Games or World Championships is at the rate of restoration, right? So your ability to handle volume of training is directly correlated to how quickly your body can shut down and get back to a parasympathetic or rest state, right? So if you're in terrible physical shape, you don't recover quickly from exposure to stress. So what that means is I go in, I lift weights, my heart rate goes way up. I do an interval session where I'm pushing 170 beats per minute. But if my aerobic system is poor or I'm under high stress, hours later, I may still be sympathetic or adrenaline-based or epinephrine-based systems are in play where I'm still elevated and anxious. I'm not recovering at that point. I'm still in the same existence I was in the weight room, even though I'm not going through the motion, right? It's like being in traffic and angry. You're not relaxed, right? So that sensation on the nervous system and hormonal system is wearing you down. We use it to achieve goals, but we don't use it to live a long life. And so what happens is you have to get the aerobic base up high enough that it can handle the stress of what you're doing, but more importantly, it actually has the system to recover you from the stress, right? So being very fit is not just about being able to do great things athletically or performance-wise. It's about being able to tolerate the stress we're putting through the system because it actually allows us to recover quicker, right?
Well, I think something to make a note of is when you say the term fight or flight, I think most people, especially in this community, and we talked about that mental toughness that's kind of a badge of honor in this community, a lot of times when you think, oh, I will be in the fight, I will win the fight, and what actually happens is you start having this degrading system and your flight mechanism just runs rampant. And where I think it's happened to me, you know, and I call it the yips or you call it the shakes when you got a big deer or something in front of you, that comes from that inability to calm yourself down through stress. So it's not just physical stress, it becomes an emotional stress, it becomes a critical thinking stress, and your inability, because of this preparation, because of the enzymes and because of all those factors involved, it's not just physical output. The stress maintains the inability to go to sleep because your wheels are turning too hot, or the inability to hold your bow steady because your wheels are turning too hot. So all of these things, while you might be able to say, oh yeah, I like the fight or flight, I'm a fighter, I will engage myself, yeah, until you can't. And
Well,
that's just
it's
the
what they call
reality.
choking.
Yeah, exactly.
It's what they call choking.
For sure.
Because when you're in that sympathetic response, what does they say that you fall to 80% of technical proficiency, at least? And I mean, we've all done it. I mean, I've smashed, when I was a hammer thrower, I smash hammers into the cage when I get super dialed up, right? And unfortunately, you turn into a gross motor skill person during that time. And you've heard people, you know, they have an elk come at 5 yards. They're like, oh my gosh, I couldn't even see my pencil. Blah! And they just go. You go, how did you miss at 5 yards? Well, sympathetic was so high, you were, you know, smelling colors at that point.
Yeah.
Well, and what is the other massive factor that dramatically affects sympathetic or the same sort of result that no one really kind of addresses is temperature change, right? So we knew when we were training marathon runners or what we thought to be very simple gross motor movement athletes like marathon tuss compared to sprint or pole vault, but we lived at altitude and we lived in southern Colorado and would be running them in the winter. We couldn't use those training sessions as technical proficiency sessions. The temperature was too cold to be able to monitor how they were running gait-wise and movement-wise because their actual physical gait changed as a preservation to temperature without them realizing it. So it wasn't until we brought them inside to the track and did speed work for them again that we could see whether or not they were technically proficient. Now the same thing holds true with very fine motor skill, right? You throw in cold temperature or incredible heat, the person may not even perceive it consciously at first, but it's dramatically affecting their central nervous system's ability to repeat effort technically with efficiency.
So you're saying is you've done a few thousand shots, and now you're in a different environment. Your body doesn't you can't mentally make an aware. So that's why that's why the miss happens.
100%. So you may not even be perceiving the fact that your body's under incredible sympathetic stress due to temperature, environmental factors, right? And because you've never been in that environment to even correlate it to how that should feel. So there has to be some time given to consideration. Now, a way to work around that obviously is amazing equipment like we have here around us in all these booths. But the other thing that you have to look at in terms of that is being able to tolerate those stressful situations by being in a state to be able to relax, breathing, etc., things of those natures. Because, for example, you get thrown into a cold bath, your breath goes through the roof, right? You start breathing rapidly, things become very sympathetic, etc. Well, the same thing happens in fight or flight scenarios without the stimulus. it's the same mechanisms all at play that you have to be able to control. How do you control that? By superior internal control of your aerobic system, right? Being able to actually manually control it through thought and technique so everything comes back to center, even if it's only for a moment, right?
Yeah, and so I guess the greater in shape somebody is with an aerobic base, you can manage all this. Hey, I rarely, I never choke, but yet on the mountain, you're out of shape. It increases the likelihood that scenario. Both these things come into play. There's no question. And fitness, I'm not going to say it fixes it, but your margin of error becomes less and less.
It's one less variable.
Yes.
Well, I think it's important to just recognize, because a lot of this stuff is high science stuff trying to be broken down, but simply understanding that we are a mechanism, and like a machine, more or less. So understanding how the machine operates, understand how the machine works optimally. Like if you want to move a car from here to there, you can get behind it and push it, or you can understand that if you get in and start it with keys, it'll do what it's told to do, right? Same thing with our body. We can will ourselves through tremendous hurdles on the mountain, in sport, performance, whatever, but understanding that, okay, there is a key to this machine that will make it perform better. And that's all of those things. I'm sure I'm looking at guys here that have made tough shots when the hands are shaking, or they're too tired, or they're dehydrated, or whatnot. But what would it have been like if you had done a little better? Would that 60-yard shot have been 40? Would your recovery time have been better and you got a better night's sleep? All of these things, while they sound like high process, are so easily to adapt. I mean, we can adapt to these things in 30 days. Now, a year, 2 years, 3 years, when you actually look at yourself as more of an athlete rather than just a hunter, I think that's where the Sorin Outdoors side starts to fit in. Is like, this is bigger than just going out there and doing a task. It's the preparation, it's the understanding. And really, as an individual, you come home and eat tag soup once or twice, you can start asking some real honest questions. Was it the mountain, was it the elk, or was it me? And I think the biggest thing that I can control is me. So understanding these things and applying these things, while it may sound over the top or, I don't need that stuff, you're wrong, 100%.
Well, we've all been from an athletic, competitive background, and as Derek said yesterday, we're against one of the world's greatest athletes, an elk or a mule deer or anything in the wild, especially with four legs and a prey animal. We're against the greatest athletes in the world, so you have to look at it strategically as well. And I look at, as a business person, I look at overhead. And I look at overhead, this taxing on the system. Why am I trying to make it harder? I can make it harder for myself while I'm training, but when I'm hunting, I want to conserve my resources and use my resources the smartest way possible. And that is smart training, not just showing up and trying to be tough. That's honestly just being dumb, because people, when they train for the Super Bowl, they try to go in as strong, as healthy, and as strategically fit as possible, with really the lowest usage of their resources, so they have the highest reserve later. And I think if people train for that, realizing how to peak for certain things, what parts of their body metrics to have in the right spot, be able to actually quantify where they are and where they need to be, so they know what they need to work on specifically. That's a strategy. And if you're going out and you like eating tag soup and you like bow hiking, as I call it, walking around the mountains with a bow, taking your bow for a hike, that's cool and all. But if I'm going to take a week off of work and spend thousands of dollars, I'm trying to win.
Yeah.
And win means get out of the mountain with the thing on my back, right?
Well, and it also means going head to head against all these other hunters. You find yourself in a situation where you're on the mountain and now you see 6 other guys glassing the same bowl. It's a very different scenario at that point. It is not me versus the animal. It is me versus them versus the animal and the elements and everything else. So this really is, it might just seem like frill or fringe ideas, but the fact of the matter is somebody is doing it right and somebody is getting result. So by taking this knowledge, by being able to apply it, understand it at a level of, okay, I don't get all the enzyme stuff, but I'm doing something in the morning that's cardio based, fasting afterward, I'm doing training in the evening, eating the right foods after. You can simplify this down to where you don't have to understand how the wheel turns, you just have to know how to turn the wheel.
Right. Speaking of getting the job done, going back to that 30-day, altitude, supplementation, rest. We talked about some hacks earlier, and I actually called you 4 years ago before I had a desert mule deer hunt that I literally had 30 days. It was December 1st. I had hunted all through October and November, East Coast, Midwest whitetail. So I'm sitting in a stand, bundled up, high calorie, really peak training form has gone down at this point, hammering it. I'm pretty much done. My equipment's put away for the season. I get a call. Hey, dude, I want you to come on a mule deer hunt January 1st. I got 30 days.
Right.
I think I called you day one.
Right.
And yeah, optimally, no. But guess what? I have to put some percentage of tolerance level. I got to shrink that gap between me and a filled tag. And let's talk about some of the things that we could do for that.
Well, the things that we did in this case in particular were kind of handy. We knew that we couldn't rewrite the book. I mean, anyone that's been through a sports world, we think of it like an off season's typically about 4 weeks, right, before we get them into strength and conditioning to progress. We knew we had about that much time. We knew that we could do a few variables that would allow us to get to the point of success, so they'd be a little bit better than where we were. But really it came down to us integrating some things to mitigate the amount of perceived stress once you were there. And there's something to be said about that, which it's kind of like a shortcut fix to something that we can't escape. So we go up to elevation, we're going to have headaches potentially, we're going to have nausea, upset stomach or nausea, we're going to have bubble guts, which, you know, is anyone that's had it, it's not great. But these are things that we can't really escape because they're physiological stress mechanisms out of our control. So I started to look at how we could try to do some of this stuff, and where the ideas came from for me is I, at 2 different times in my life, had coached collegiate athletes above 7,000 feet. And it's a very unique situation to get into. Now, I went to the University of Wyoming, which was 7,200, so I lived it for a long time. But when I was at 7,600 feet in southern Colorado at Adams State, it was a constant issue we dealt with. No matter how much time you spend there, sometimes you need a little extra. So we did things to try to upregulate the system and also increase the rate of recovery when you went back to your tent. Some of those mechanisms that we used is we tried to control cortisol, which is the stress chemical. We controlled that one by increasing the amount of blood flow and oxygenation into the tissue. We did it through things like beetroot or L-arginine, right? Amino acids of that nature that basically you hear every day in terms of heart health. We also looked at old-fashioned things like CoQ10 or ubiquinol, you know, because we knew that by taking CoQ10, the same thing your doctor recommends that you take supplement-wise to give you a healthy heart, does magical things to increase mitochondria in terms of your ability to handle that stress, because it's all cardiovascular stress initially at elevation. You know, it's no different. We're at elevation right now, but everyone, if you had been monitoring your heart rate the first couple nights you got up here from sea level, you'd been like, weird, my heart rate was high, or for sure some of you recognize this, I woke up multiple times throughout the night my first couple nights here because your CO2 levels got too high. So we're trying to mitigate that. We're trying to increase the amount of oxygenation to the tissue, to the brain in particular, to the heart and lungs, to make the system more efficient. And then we also did, you know, old-fashioned hacks like increasing a little Advil to make sure the headaches didn't deter from the focus, you know, as well as preparating into that, you know, hunt by making sure that you could tolerate the ability to walk under load, to do those things that Kel's going to get into depth here with in terms of ways to make your body more efficient in a very short period of time. But a lot of it is just giving yourself a little extra that you normally wouldn't do so that your body was more efficient in an environment that maybe you weren't quite ready for, you know?
Yep, I know we, go ahead.
How far out would somebody want to start that? You think the 30 days, right?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. So 30 days, it can be done. We had a unique situation a couple years ago. I had the opportunity to train a female stunt woman from Australia named Kai Farrow, who's a survivalist. She's been on Naked and Afraid and things of that nature. But she was in a unique situation where she was given 4 weeks notice to go out and to get above 17,000 feet in elevation in a one-on-one race in, I think it's called First Man Out, right? It's an English TV show on the History Channel, and they race in some of the harshest climates in the world. So we had way less than 30 days, and she was at sea level, right? So she comes up from LA, she comes to our house at the time where our house was at 8,000. So she lived with us for 10 days, and then we would go up to 11,000 feet and do these very specific short duration, which I know you're gonna really go down this road, short duration, anaerobic interval style hikes, right? So we did that for 2 weeks, got her acclimation up a little bit, but I think she ended up getting close to 20,000 feet in elevation, running in 5 to 6 feet of snow the whole 9, right? Like, it was no joke. Here's the truth about that episode, if you ever saw it. She would have won and been the first person to ever win, and they purposefully made it more difficult so she wouldn't win. She was so well prepared for it. But once we got her ready for that, then we dramatically increased her ability to tolerate oxygen at the chemical level using beetroot, using L-arginine, using Advil, using caffeine, using all these like neuroadaptogens, right? So that when she was at that elevation, she wasn't so overwhelmed. And by adding that in and getting her up there, she never had altitude sickness. The whole crew and all the film crews were like wiped out. She was fine. They actually made her start doing challenges at 17,000 feet, like, hey, we want you to get into this ice cold water and show us how to dry out in this environment. Like, stuff that was ridiculous. But it's because they were trying to hold her back from smoking the dude, like, truthfully. So it can be done in under 30, but it has to be all in every day.
100%. So 30 days out, minimum, start that protocol. Yeah.
I know we were talking earlier about some of the different step-ups and cuffs and different things like that. We were talking about fast twitch. So it was an awesome conversation. I wish this whole thing was taped in our booth about an hour and a half ago, because it was blowing my mind, and you have 2 experts, and it was awesome. So we'll try to recreate it.
Well, I think we should maybe talk about the CO2 thing.
Yeah.
Right? And that'll be the start. Where, look, just an example first, somebody to kind of get a good temperature, a simple test, you get a good temperature where your ability to handle CO2 is at in your brain, is I call it the Comax test. So you just stand on a line.
Anyone want to try it?
You can try it later. So basically, I'd stand at a starting point. I just blow. You're going to hold your breath while you walk, but you're not going to breathe in. You're going to blow all your air out. And then you start walking at a normal pace. And if you get to 20 steps, it's not that good before you feel the ability to gasp for air. You're not trying to fight it. The second you actually naturally start to say, oh, there I gasped for air, you stop, you have counted your steps. If you're at 10 to 20, folks, you got a long way to go, because a healthy 60-year-old can go to 60. Okay, but it's just it's not the ultimate gauge in like fitness, but it's a good rule on your ability to handle CO2, and there's going to be a lot in your body up at the upper elevation. So one of the hacks that you can do to help your brain manage that is in that morning cardio session. As you're working out, maybe at the first time you set your alarm the first week at 5 minutes. And at the beginning and then after every 5 minutes, you blow all your air out, keep doing your cardio. And fight that urge to breathe for a little while, right? And you may get 6 to 7 seconds. My advanced athletes that have taken a month off get 6 to 7 seconds while you're doing cardio with that. And then eventually they get to a point where they're doing 20 and 30 while they're exercising. Now, again, the breath hold is not hold all your air in. It's blow everything out and then hold your breath. So that's a hack that you can do every 5 minutes to increase this ability to manage that CO2 at the high levels, because you're going to be at low altitude. And if you actually take a oximeter on your finger, you can start pushing your oxygen levels down to 90, and you're normally about 93. You start at 90, it'll go to 85. You might even get below 80, which is actually a great adaptation. Yeah, and there's a few really good ones, but ultimately, if you're normally at 92, 94, 95, and now you're seeing it at 80, you're getting a huge training effect. Simulating the mountain is what you're doing. So, and then the next week, maybe cut it to 4 minutes. My athletes advance fairly fast. Just make sure you're healthy and you got a physical, along those guidelines. But the hopes is that you can get there and function. If you can function and keep your cardio going and hold your breath, and you're getting your oxygen levels to 80, 85, that's a big deal. And you're ready to handle that mountain from a fitness level.
Because you're going to be in oxygen debt.
100%.
That's what we talked about, anaerobic and aerobic earlier, and fast twitch, slow twitch. Talk a little bit about that, because that's what you're realizing. You are going to be you're going to be spending on a low bank account to start with.
Well, that's what Derek talked about, and Brandon, is that when you're in that state, your body's going, oh, I'm in trouble. This is not normal, and that's why you can't recover at night. Those are all the things that are going on.
Well, yeah, exactly. So when you get into that state where the CO2 level is very high in your system, think of it as like an alarm bell goes off that you can't control. It's a panic button. That panic button goes off, and what does it do? It increases respiration and heart rate, right? So that's its mechanism to deal with the lack of oxygen that you're getting in your system because the chemical reaction has been decreased. You know, and I think a lot of people have a little bit of a misunderstanding of altitude. Like when we think of, say, Denver, Colorado, everyone's like, it's high altitude. It's actually not. It's altitude, but it's not high altitude. We're actually not at high altitude right here. Like where we're sitting now, we're still not at the threshold. We're below 8,000 feet. So there is a massive acceleration of stress above 8,000. So people that have been hanging out down here, when they go up the gondola or they get up onto the courses and they start walking, all of a sudden they're like, ooh, this is different. This is hitting me different than down in the village. And it's only a couple hundred, 300, 400 feet. But the rate of stress on the system, neurologically as well as just the stress on the respiration and respiratory system above 8,000, it's a curve that just goes vertical, right? And eventually you get up to the death zone of Mount Everest and you never come back, right? So there's a point of no return. Now, when you look at it that way, and what Cal's saying, and what is really key to kind of take home, it's out of your control. It's out of your control. So when you start to go up in elevation from sea level, right? Or, you know, I used to live at around 8,500 feet. You would think that I was forever immune. Some days were worse than others. The body is always working. Now, with that being said, the reason why it's so important to get these systems healthy is to prevent the brain from chronically going into the alarm state, which drives adrenaline. When adrenaline goes up, the heart rate drives, respiration drives, and it's just more accumulated stress causing you to fatigue and burn out in relationship to what you're trying to do. So you just can't work as hard because you don't have the mechanisms or the go juice to be able to get through what you're asking of yourself. You're under too much stress without you having any control over it.
And I think in that morning cardio, to help that, we talk about holding your breath, but then after 5 or 6 weeks, you retest your Comax, and you may have went from 20 to 25 steps to 45 to even 50. Now you know you're in a way better spot, right? And then that morning cardio, I would highly recommend not breathing through your mouth when you do it. Breathe through your nose the whole time. Breathing through your nose.
That's usually, you could either keep your mouth shut just voluntarily or taping your mouth shut. I know you guys have talked about taping your mouth shut while you sleep as well.
Yeah, well, I highly recommend when you're preparing for this is that you tape your mouth shut so you learn to breathe through your nose at night. That'll actually help with vasodilation, a ton of blood flow things, right? And your resting heart rate. It's been money on athletes that have a breathing problem that tape their mouth shut, their heart rate becomes slower at night. And that's actually helping your body. So the morning cardio, holding your breath, is helping you train for the CO2, but so is taping your mouth shut at night.
Because you're teaching more diaphragmatic breathing, which is tied to the vagal nerve, which is tied to sympathetic and parasympathetic, and so that shuts everything back down to the point where your body could rest and recover and regenerate.
Yeah, I mean, it's all a huge mechanism, and you're just trying to piece this thing out to make yourself better for that mountain.
Good info. We talked about heat and cold training before, as far as obviously if you're going to go train someplace or hunt someplace hot, how beneficial is it to train hot, or do you train at regular temperature and do things like sauna or steam baths to heat inoculate or heat proteins, or is that something that you still want to do, the ice baths for anti-inflammatory benefits? Like, where do you guys stand on ice baths, saunas, heat, the whole deal?
Well, I mean, it's something that I've taken into practice really in the last 3 to 4 years. And one of the issues for me that I was doing it was I was trying to do other people's protocols right off the jump. And I think that's one of the things that we've talked about yesterday and today is this is a systematic progression, and you have to just start. If it's an ice bath, start with a minute. If it's a sauna, start with 10 minutes. Let your body do the adaptation so it doesn't increase the stress when you're trying to optimize stress relief. And I think that's one of the things that with athletes that I've seen, you start to see that parasympathetic sympathetic relationship start to level out a little bit. And I think the key factor for most of the people that I enjoy doing these kind of things with, we'll do a super hot sauna, 10-15 minutes, 1 to 2 minutes in the ice, 10 to 15 minutes back in the sauna, and just getting the body kind of like quickly adapting to those two stressors. Now, as far as like scientific benefit that these guys could go into more of, I sleep better. I don't feel as sore. A little bit more of a cognitive clarity kind of thing, especially after the ice bath. And ice shower is a great place to start if you don't want to have the bath. But yeah, it's definitely been something that I have utilized. It's been something that I've benefited from, and it's also something that I program for my own athletes.
And if you can, I like a steady state bike in the sauna. That is a really unbelievable training tool to prepare you for the heat environment, is what we're trying to do. There's no doubt.
Yeah, you know, and I think to piggyback on that, the thing that we always used to talk about in terms of sending athletes overseas was the fact that it takes a little bit of time. Athletes can be a little bit individualistic on this in terms of adaptation to environment, humidity, heat, cold, etc. But you know, your maximal adaptation is 28 days, right? And that's not like it's some steadfast rule, but it can take a while to get used to something that's significantly different in terms of humidity in particular. And so when we used to start to look at that, to kind of jump on what Cal was saying, and Brandon in particular, you have to find the system that is most beneficial to you and your athlete at that particular time. Simply putting an ice barrel in your backyard and climbing in it for the sake of some Instagram fame, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's not necessarily going to do much, right? In terms of global effect on performance. It has to be but one piece of a very big, complex system of restoration, right? So you have to look at how is it related to your training? How is it related to the other factors involved? If you're only using ice bath, because that's the trend of the week right now, but you're not training really, really hard, your stress is the ice bath.
Right.
It's actually not doing anything. And it's like, ooh, taboo. No, it's not taboo. We've been using ice baths in track and field for a millennia, right? Now, they weren't as fancy as the ones we have today. They were a kid's pool full of, you know, ice and water. But the reason that we use them is to increase the rate of recovery following hard, strenuous activity, decrease inflammation markers, you know, potentiate the release of positive hormones in the body. But the Norwegians figured out a long time ago that icing intently doesn't dramatically change inflammation specifically, right? Now, submerging into cold temperature has a global effect on hormone release, which can help you get to a parasympathetic state over time, but simply getting in ice as if it's going to be the great equalizer without having a very demanding training that follows or is involved with that system, you're just basically getting cold for no reason, you know?
In regards to the cold, I've seen it make athletes worse at the wrong times. They become so stressed. So if you don't literally like the cold and it takes your breath away, it might not be something that works for you. If you can still stay calm, I've seen the heart rate variability and all the stress these athletes hate it. Now, some athletes, it's day to day, where, hey, I get in an ice bath today, this feels great. The next day they get in it, they're all stressed, and the ice bath takes their breath away, and they're like, nope, I'm getting out. So it's kind of, you can individualize it a little bit, right? But you'll find that, as these guys say, on a hard training day, it's actually, they actually like it most days. But if they just get it on a Sunday where they're not that stressed, they hate it.
100%. And I would say if I had a modality that I had to choose outside of restoration techniques like soft tissue work, like if someone was like, hey, you can only do one thing to recover for the rest of your life, it would be have a live-in massage therapist. Like if I only had one, right? But if I was to be forced to make the decision over hot or cold in terms of performance improvement, I'm taking hot every time. So I'm always going to lean athletes towards sauna before I ever lean them towards ice.
And I think for everybody here, the sauna and the magic benefits of all these things it's blood flow. So a massager, if you're going to massage, it moves blood flow. Sauna moves blood flow. The cold stops it, but then when you get out, it restarts up and it flushes things out. So all these magical recovery things, they move blood. So one of the simplest, right? One of the simplest recovery tools I've ever seen and I've tracked all these with my mechanisms. A 20-minute walk in the evening recovers people. So let's say you're on that 30-day burn, right? And you got the morning, and you lift after work, you come home, you're with the family, you eat some dinner, kids go to bed. I'm telling you, a 20-minute walk. I didn't see any more benefits after 20, and I saw great benefits up to 20. So, and at night, and there's a lot to do with actually you going to sleep at night in the last hour of sun. If you get the last hour of sun, it down-regulates you. So if you go outside for a 20-minute walk, maybe with your wife, right, have some time, and the sun at the evening will down-regulate you. The sun in the morning helps upregulate you.
So the circadian rhythms.
Circadian rhythms, everything. The biorhythms, circadian rhythms, everything. So one of the, if you don't have a sauna, a great recovery tool is a 20-minute walk. Non-stress, 20-minute walk. Not fast even, just move. You're moving blood. That's all we're doing.
Awesome. Well, you're talking about massage, and I know how important massage is. That's something I've prescribed to for decades upon decades. I know Cal, Reflexive Performance Reset, that's RPR. That's something that you've designed, been a practitioner, and I know you and I have talked about a couple different ways. And what is RPR? I know this is a very cursory. We only have about 10 more minutes. Could you tell us a little bit about what that is, and even a few things that it could work for that I have used, and a lot of the special operations community has certainly used as well?
Yeah, RPR is a series of reflexes that we've been able to test and find throughout the body, and ultimately put a whole system together where in 3 minutes, this summer we're doing an experiment where we ran 3,000 workouts with no warm-ups. We've just done 3 minutes of RPR before, and it kind of it does activate the muscles. It kind of takes some of the compensation patterns away out of your body. And you can look it up. There's a coaching course, there's an individual course that's much cheaper. But ultimately, we do one of our resets is a breathing reset, where you actually dig out some of the fascia that helps reset your diaphragm so that your breathing patterns change. If you're breathing from your chest all the time, you have a dysfunctional breathing pattern. Okay, you should be breathing from your stomach. And when you can release this, I've seen athletes drop their resting heart rate 10 to 15 beats in one night. Okay, so and then I had an Army Ranger with PTSD, and the first RPR session he had only been sleeping 2 to 3 hour intervals, getting up and down for years, had 13 hours of straight sleep. Because we just shifted him into a less stressed state with this system. And really it's a few things, just about 12 points in the basic level to where you can just reset your body. Now you go and work out and you start in a better state, and then the workout kind of helps set that new state into play, and that you can hold that state. And it's a system that, sure, I can dig on you, and Derek's unbelievable manual therapy where we can work on you, but I wanted to create a system where people can do it to themselves daily, and they don't have to rely on somebody like a massage therapist. But if you go to the chiropractor, you do this after, it helps everything hold into place a little bit better. So it's something you can look up, Reflexive Performance Reset. We have a website. We certified people all over the country and the world. So it's just another tool that somebody could use in very many positions where they're going to prepare themselves for the mountain.
Right. I know there's specific ones that you and I have talked about and actually utilize. You know, if you look at someone, let's say if they're about to get in a fight, like a bar fight, right? What do you see happens? Breathing rate increases, posture changes, chest breathing happens, everything tightens up in the core and the abs. Obviously, it's sympathetic, it's literal fight, not flight. You see all these things happening, and I find myself at times in stress, the same type of postural things happen. The traps come up, the shoulders retract a little bit, chest breathing, abs stay tight, and then I realize, watching on my ring or my watch, heart rate variability going down, heart rate going up, and it's like, what's going on? And then you've talked about, even if you could show them one of the Reflexive Performance Reset for breathing, releases all this stuff, and all of a sudden I could get back to belly breathing, which is diaphragmatic, everything drops back down, I could actually start to recover. Because I've had chronic days in a row of this that you're like, okay, something's going on in me hormonally or in the system, whatever. You're like, oh, right, my breathing is totally screwed right now.
Right. I'll give you one example where people have been going up a mountain with a pack. These are special operations, and their back's tightening up. And we've taught them these points, and the one point that we taught him is basically like right underneath the skull. It's going to turn your butt back on. So his butt wasn't really like optimizing itself, and his lower back started tightening up. And he's going to finish the mission no matter what. But he was like, I just went back behind the skull. I went underneath the skull on both sides of it. I kept going right around the bone, and this is our glute. This is our butt one. And you go right behind your jaw in that like trigger point area, and you hit that. So basically, you use both hands. You go around the skull, right, and then you come underneath behind the jaw. He turned that on, and in a few steps, the back loosened up, and he was able to complete the mission. He was going to do that anyway, but ultimately in less pain and no discomfort. And another one that's great for the breathing is you just start like in the middle of your chest, and you split your chest like, you know, that torture move that your older brother or that you would do to your younger brothers. You go right down through here, and then all you got to do is follow the ribs on both sides underneath. Spend about 30 seconds rubbing on it, and it's going to be uncomfortable at first. And you work on your breathing, and you work on your belly breathing while you're doing that, and things just start to change, and you actually calm yourself down with breathing. It's a huge tool, and RPR, the difference is there's people teaching breathing, but we actually reset the tissue that's involved in breathing so that now I don't even have to coach many of these people. Once we do the reset, they just start belly breathing on their own. So it's a huge tool because, folks, we're so stressed. I'm talking my athletes, everybody, the work that we do. We weren't designed to drive and work all day. We're designed to walk through the woods, which is much more peaceful, right?
Well, I was just going to say, you know, to try to bring it down to somebody that's got the, you know, the wide-eyed look about what he's saying, think about your car. Think about your car and think about your spark plugs or, you know, your firing cap. It has a specific sequential order that it fires so that it can run efficiently. So like what he was talking about, when you get somebody on the mountain and we were talking about ankle flexion yesterday, and that overstresses the calf, which overstresses the knee, which overstresses the hip, and then all of a sudden these big, beautiful glutes that you've developed, they're not doing their job. Well, that threshold moves up to the back. So you're missing part of the firing pattern. So some of the stuff that he's talking about, well, it sounds like voodoo or a little bit wishy-washy. It's actually teaching your body to refire, and that's why it's so important pre-workout, I think. I've found better result pre-workout, because then you're going into a movement pattern that is retraining your body into the efficient, proper movement pattern or the firing pattern of the muscle group so that you're not getting the tight back when your glute should have been taking half the load the whole time.
And you're doing less work because your body's moving efficiently. Basically, your gas mileage goes up is a great analogy, I would say. Your truck's not firing, you're pulling a trailer, you might get 8 miles a gallon. You get everything tuned in, then you might go to 12 or 13.
Well, and even to kind of jump on that, I had a situation, it'd be 2 years ago now, where because of all the dysfunction from all the surgeries I had, I was telling you about it, I went hiking, had a 7 mile in, above 10,000 feet. It only maxed out at 12,000, but it was 7 miles in. I got rhabdo. I was in good shape at the time, but I got rhabdo, and it's because I was having to work so incredibly hard through dysfunction because my firing patterns were terrible that when I came out of it, I was destroyed, and I shouldn't have been.
And rhabdo is a problem with the kidneys where you've had too much muscle damage. And this is something that you could have done that at sea level, no problem, right?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, you have, right? But in the mountains on low oxygen, it puts you in a state where your kidney was being damaged because of all the muscle damage running through it. So that's the thing. And Derek still, when he says he's not an advanced athlete, he's still way above everybody else. We would all agree that, right? So, but you're talking about somebody that put themselves through enough stress that he wasn't even aware of that was causing damage. And that's the hopes that we create a system here that can handle this, manage the stress.
100%, like I literally just toughed it out, right? Going back to what we talked about yesterday, because I had to get home. I got 7 miles in, I got to get 7 miles back. I had no choice, but the cost was high to the point I didn't even realize it. I just knew I wasn't good. I wasn't in a good way when I got back, and it wasn't until I had a random physical where I was like, 3 days later, where I was like, oh yeah, I damaged my body, and the only two variables that were different was dysfunctional movement and altitude.
And Derek, you've put yourself through some unbelievable workouts where you never had that appear. But in the mountains, where something you would have never thought would have caused the problem. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that going back to the breathing thing, first of all, the altitude, I've definitely had that. Sig Hunter Games I was at a month ago, similar thing, carrying a heavy pack. We had 100 pounds on our back. It was about a mile and a half movement on slick, muddy roads. We had 30 minutes to do it. It was 6-7 miles in. My glutes totally locked down to the point where I was just standing there And the guy beside me, we looked at each other and go, can you even move? And I was like, no, man, my glutes have just mechanically locked down. And I know it was from dysfunction. I know it was altitude. We were 10,000 feet. It was the load, but it was also, that stressor was so high on my body. I was like, oh man, I'm going to rhabdo. This is going to suck. How am I going to, it was like you start going through like, what's the next 3 days of my life going to be? The part that would have really been unfortunate, what if I was on a, 8-day lifetime hunt and now I'm out for the next 6 days or something like that. But so going back to the breathing, RPR breathing, and even the glute piece, I love the idea of the glutes. Let's say you're got a bomb up a mountain, hear a bull coming in, you got your back's already tight, but I got to put the hammer down, right? Hit the spots, turn the glutes on, hammer up the mountain. You're getting there, bull screaming coming through. He's a couple hundred yards out. You're starting to hyperventilate. You're starting to go into sympathetic, fight or flight. You're starting to get from that fine motor skill to gross motor skill. Go right into your breathing. Shut that chest breathing down, come back into belly breathing, lower the heart rate back down, increase mental focus and acuity. You have a better chance of killing that bull when it comes to it.
100%. When your heart rate's that high, these are the mistakes that happen to officers who aren't stress inoculated, where their heart rate's high, and a kid, maybe slightly deaf, has grabbed his wallet and is black to show the cop his ID and that he's deaf, but the cop doesn't see it. He thinks it's a black object and it's a gun, and the mistakes can be made. So those are the type of mistakes that are going to happen when your heart rate's that elevated, right? So if you can just be aware of that, control that mechanism, and doing your morning cardio, really focus on trying to belly breathe the whole time through your nose, and you'll be more efficient. You'll make, the special operations community, it's crazy how they have two groups going, and the group that's in the shoot house running through the drills has a lower heart rate than the group that's standing outside listening to the shots go, because the group outside, they have no control of what's going on. They're just hearing the shots and they track them, and their heart rate goes up. The guys are just standing around waiting because the anxiousness. But the dudes that are trained, that are in there, when they all go in there, they calm themselves down. So this is a mechanism you have to deal with when you're shooting, when you're trying to practice at home, everything in your cardio. This is something you have to be aware of.
Amazing. Well, it looks like we're just about out of time. We're going to be over there in the Sorin Outdoors booth the rest of the day. This is Derek Woodske, Cal Dietz, Brandon Lilly. My name is Bert Sorin, Sorin Outdoors. Hit us up on IG. Hit us up over there if you have some specific questions, want to learn more about some of the CO2 max tests, even some of the RPR. I mean, these guys are an absolute wealth of knowledge, and they really, really share as much as possible. But even if you want to see some content coming out, we're going to have some stuff on Sorin Outdoors. But follow these guys on IG because they're always coming up with different things, and wildly valuable humans out there in the training world. I have 4 people that I hit almost every time if I have a training question for myself. I've been in this for a really, really long time. 3 of them are sitting on the stage with me. The last one is my doctor, Dr. Eric Serrano, and that's my go-to people. I have access to everyone in the world for training, and these are my go-to people, and this for a reason. But we appreciate your time. Thank you to Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Thank you to Riza. Thank you for getting us up here, and we hope you enjoyed it, and let us know if we can help you.